Hello, welcome to episode 100 of CXO-Talk. I'm Michael Krigsman with my, how do I say this? Persistent and relentless co-host Vala Afshar, because Vala, we have done 100 episodes today.
Michael, it's amazing to think we've been able to deliver 100 episodes with some of the most extraordinary thought leaders and business leaders. In fact, if you don't mind, I looked at the roster of our 100 shows, which started with show number 1 with Guy Kawasaki in 2013. And as far as CEOs of Fortune 500 and founders of startups, we've had 12 guests that fit that profile. 15 Fortune 250 executives, 28 chief information officers, 10 technology analysts, including group vice presidents from Gartner and IDG, 7 venture capitalists, 6 best-selling authors, 1 Emmy Award winner, 1 brigadier general, 1 NBA team owner, and today our first chief content officer. So pretty amazing roster of 100 guests.
Vala, you know what? When I hear you read that list, I get tired.
I get goosebumps.
Okay. I know, it's amazing. I mean, it's like all right, okay. Enough about that. We are here today with John Gallant, who is the Chief Content Officer for one of the largest media companies in the country, IDG Communications. John, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Michael. I'm doing well, Vala. I am thrilled to be on here. I have to think that if you started off with Guy Kawasaki and in your 100th episode you're getting to me, I think you're going in the wrong direction. But I'm happy to be here and honored to be.
Thank you, sir.
Well, you know, John, if you have a computer glitch and your computer dies, then dial back in and we'll be here. And you know, Vala, it looks like timing is everything, right? And it's not my fault that his computer just died.
Why would you think? Did I somehow look like I was going to implicate you in this?
No, it's my paranoid. It sounds like he's struggling to get through. It sounds like he's trying to wiggle through the wires or the Ethernets.
John, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, you got. I can hear you now. It seems like we're back.
Perfect.
Are we good?
Can you tell us a little bit about IDG and yourself, please?
Sure. IDG actually is the largest tech publishing company in the world, and we are published around the world in every continent. And in fact, the founder of IDG, Pat McGovern, once published an issue of Computer World on Antarctica to have the honor of publishing everywhere in the world on all 7 continents. In the U.S., I work for a company, actually a branch of IDG known as IDG US Media. And IDG US Media consists of our publishing arm, and we'll talk some more about that, as well as the IDG Tech Network, which is our advertising network. It's now a global advertising network. And our event business, IDG World Expo, which produces events like E3, along with the entertainment industry group, and Mac IT and other events like that. So IDG is a big global company that consists of the publishing units. It consists of IDC, research, and venture capital companies in the U.S., in China, India, Vietnam. So a very big influence and a very big footprint on technology around the world.
We recently had a guest who was, up until recently, on the board of IDG named Christopher Michael. Now, you're Chief Content Officer at IDG. What does a Chief Content Officer do, and what does that mean? You know, Vala?
Yes, sir.
I'm not taking responsibility for that. I didn't do it.
I've heard that more than, not 100 times, but more.
he's like
A little bit.
shimmying
Can you
through
hear
the
me?
wires. Now we hear you. There you go.
Great. So I think your question was, what does a chief content officer do?
That's right.
Yes. Yes.
Great. So as Chief Content Officer, essentially my role is to determine the overall content strategy that drives the business of IDG in the U.S. So I work with the editors-in-chief of our two major sets of business units, which are the enterprise brands, which I think you're all familiar with, publications and websites like CIO, Computer World, Network World, Info World, IT World, Java World, all the worlds. So we are the worlds. And then I also work with our consumer publishing brands, the groups like PC World, Mac World, TechHive, which is our connected home site, and Greenbot, which is our site about the Android ecosystem. And our goal there is to serve each of those audiences, whether it's a consumer who's trying to figure out the best way to use Android technology or Mac technology, Apple technology, or the professional IT folks who are trying to get the most out of their expenditures in professional IT. So I work with the editorial teams in setting content strategy, figuring out ways that we can use social, how do we position for mobile, and a whole bunch of other things in between.
John, content is so important, not just to marketing, but to all businesses looking to drive, successful outcomes. Do you think that, will most Fortune or all Fortune 1000 companies at some point have a chief content officer?
Yeah, I think that at some point they'll have someone in a role, whether they have someone in that title, I'm not sure. But it has become absolutely central in how we communicate with the audience, whether that's a reading audience, a viewing audience, or a consuming audience that's buying your products. So actually, Michael and I were talking about this in an earlier conversation where we have seen people who are professional journalists at IDG who have moved on to roles in the corporate world. We had the previous editor-in-chief of CIO.com who recently became the head of content marketing or one of the top folks there at Travelers Insurance. We've had folks go off to Apple. We've had folks go to companies like CA. So I think more and more companies are realizing the importance of quality content in building that ongoing relationship with their customers.
So what is your relationship to each of these many magazines?
So Michael, the way that works is at a high level, my goal is to make sure I work with those editors to ensure that they serve their audiences well. When you look across the technology landscape, there are a lot of people covering a lot of similar technologies. They may be talking about cloud or mobile or security. But the value that IDG brings to this market is delivering content that's targeted at specific valuable audiences. So when we talk to that CIO, we have to make sure whether it's through words, video, slideshows, events, any way that we touch that CIO audience, we're doing it in a way that delivers specific high value that another brand out in the market can't deliver. If we're not doing that, there's really no value in the brand differentiation we have. So whether you're talking about a network world reader, someone who's driving corporate network strategy, or you're talking about one of those consumers who are trying to use Apple products to enhance their life, enhance their work, we have to produce the best content for those audiences. Within that, we also have to figure out how to use all the tools that are available to us because it's a very different landscape. When I started working back in 1983, it was about 6 months after electricity was invented. I began working with Computer World, and I covered the mainframe software industry for Computer World, which is a very different landscape today than it was then, obviously. But at that point, we were producing 300-page print issues of Computer World. Well, print is a different medium today. It's very different. The economics are different. The value's different. In fact, we only have one print publication left with CIO Magazine. But today we have a variety of tools that we can bring to bear to help those audiences. We have very robust websites. We have a robust web business. We're doing more and more video. We do podcasting. There are just so many ways to serve that audience, no matter where they are, when they want to consume that information, and how they want to consume that information.
So a few years ago, if I would read, CIO.com or InfoWorld, Computer World, and all of the IDG pubs, I wouldn't consistently see authors with their social credentials and Twitter handles, and now today, without exception, I can, when I read an article, click and follow the author. So certainly social has impact the changes that we see in media. What are some of the underlying changes in the media business that you can share with us?
Well, it's interesting. Social has been a big one, and we're a big fan of social media and the impact on journalism today because traditionally people find our sites in a couple of ways. They find them through their peers or they find them through search. Primarily it's search today, and that has value, but it's also a slippery slope for us because if Google changes its algorithms or if one of the other search providers changes things, it can have a positive or negative effect on us. And that's largely out of our control. We want to reach out via social because we know that for IT buyers, whether they're consumers or they're professionals, that peer influence is so important to them. They value that peer influence so much more than they value a recommendation from us, a recommendation from a company, a recommendation from Google. So we want to get our content out. We want to build those conversations. We want to make those connections in social media. And that's why we're putting the authors out there and the editors out there and really trying to build those strong connections and understand also, and Vala, you understand this so well, the
Boy, we're not having good connections right now. We need a CIO to come in and make this work.
Yeah, John, last few seconds you were cut off. I don't know if you can hear us.
You know, this is where just like plain old telephones,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, the power of digital.
The power of digital, right, exactly. Here we are with the power of digital when, we could just lift up the phone and call him and it would work.
No, I can hear you now.
Oh,
Perfect.
Excellent. So you were talking about social and the impact of social media, and I had a question about that. So you were saying that you're putting your editors and your writers out there, but how do you balance the tension of building up a cadre of stars, essentially, versus wanting them to put forth the central brand as opposed to building their own personal brand? How do you balance that?
Well, I think it is a challenge to balance that, and one of the things that we've done is, I think for the past 5 years now, we've had a social media task force within the editorial, within the content department, that has outlined those very kinds of guidelines. Which of the social media should be used for what kinds of things? How should we use that? Because we are, in essence, leaning on people's social circle to spread our content, to spread our ideas and our influence, and we need to balance how we do that. We also want people to be personalities. We want people to connect with the authors. It's a very crowded and competitive content landscape, and if we can differentiate by the quality of our journalists as well as by the quality of the content, that's very important to us. Now, that said, there are occasions where we have to be mindful of the things that we might say to friends are also being consumed by the professionals that have followed us. So it's a difficult balance, but it's one I think our team has done a nice job handling.
Today we hear, John, I don't want to call it buzzword because it's real, but digital transformation. It's top of mind for marketeers, CIOs, and frankly, CEOs. What does digital transformation specifically mean for news and media?
Well, Vala, I'll step back and talk about it from our readers' perspective. It is very real for our readers today, and we're spending an awful lot of time covering that. I think it's as our audiences look to figure out how do they change the relationship with customers, how do they change the relationship with business partners through digital means, this is a huge transformation, and we have to help people both understand it and lead it. And I think the leading that is a critical part. Our industry has been completely revamped by digital transformation. Everything about the way people deal with us, whether it's the growing volume of folks who are accessing our content through mobile, or the way people buy advertising today. It's not strictly I reach people through your brand. They want to know about the people. They want to know the data of what sites, where they're going to our sites. Every aspect of our business is being changed by information, and we're adapting to that, and it's challenging in many ways to adapt to that. But that's the reality that we're facing today.
Makes sense.
So John, you're still breaking up, and we apologize to the audience. This is what happens when you do a live show on streaming media. So as you're thinking through these changing dynamics of the media business, how does that affect the decisions that you're making, the business decisions that you're making in terms of how do you relate to print, how do you relate to online, how do you gather the audience? So this impact of this notion of digital transformation, how is it affecting your decision making?
It's really around, Michael, where we put resources today. So this is a business; it's a publishing business, and we're here to make money and earn revenue. And we do that by connecting audiences of buyers to audiences of sellers. So we're looking for the most efficient means to do that. Each of these different tools that we have at our disposal has a different role in that process. And part of that role is how that medium or that media serve advertisers. And print was challenging on that front. I think it was difficult for advertisers to make the connection between the marketing spend and the result of that marketing spend. That is a much clearer connection in online, although it's not a perfect connection to. So a lot of this.
Hey, John, we got a great John. We have a great suggestion from one of our viewers. John, can you hear me? John, we have a great suggestion from one of our viewers, Bilal Jaffrey, who suggests turning your Hi, Vala.
Hi, Michael.
How you doing?
What's a media company?
John, I think we.
All right.
John?
I think we're back. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, listen, we got a great suggestion from Bilal Jaffrey, who is viewing right now, who suggests that you turn your video down from high def to medium, and the way you can do that is at the top of your screen. You see that it's like a triangle with little bars, looks like cell phone signal bars. If you click that and just move the slider to the left, maybe that will help.
All right, I just adjusted that. Thank you for the tip.
Perfect.
All right. So
you were talking about the different set of KPIs, John, in terms of what digital allows you to perhaps improve the ability to use data and analytics. How has that changed over the years in terms of measuring your effectiveness of connecting buyers to sellers using your content?
A lot, Val. It's a great question. We have our editors in many ways have become analytics folks. We use a wide variety of tools. We use the Adobe Omniture tools. We use Chartbeat to track social engagement with our content. We're trialing a tool now called Parsley that lets us look at engagement and how our stories are trending, and all things like that. So we look at a wide variety of KPIs on a daily, weekly, hourly basis to make sure that the audience is engaging, and also to capture spikes of interest in particular topics and in particular stories. On the flip side of that, on the business side, people are connecting with, there is such a slew of tools to track the behaviors of people online, to track how one piece of content leads them to connect with another piece of content, whether that's an ad, lead generation materials, signing up for an event or a newsletter. So we're constantly trying to make those connections between the content that we're creating and the end result of that content.
So, John, how does that impact the quality? Because when editors and writers become analytics experts, their focus naturally will gravitate towards higher numbers, and that means that can mean a race to the least common denominator of journalism. Basically, last journalism.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to put out a slideshow, 10 things we don't like about Steve Jobs, and we can certainly generate a lot of traffic with that. I think the beauty of all this information is it allows us to marry two things, the art and the science of media. In the past, media was primarily art. It was the editorial judgment about what we think the readers want to know and need to know. Well, today we can get a lot of information about what people want to know. So we can find out through search, SEO-oriented tools. We can do more online surveying. We can track consumption patterns and look at predictive behaviors and really find out the information that people absolutely need to know. And then we can marry that up with our ideas and our thoughts and that art of other things that we think we need to bring to their attention. You know, print publishing served a wonderful role of making sure that you were aware of things that you didn't think to look for. Online does a wonderful job at directed search and directed information finding, so we can marry those two things and help people get the things they know they need, as well as presenting them with ideas and opportunities that they might not have been aware of that are really valuable to them.
So John, as I'm listening to you and you talk about your editors becoming over time analytic experts, and your staff writers have a digital footprint and they're sharing their content on through social media and their various social networks, how does all this impact your hiring process, as an example, at IDG? Are you looking for certain skills and traits and competencies today that you may have not prioritized a few years ago?
Yeah, absolutely, Vala. We're looking for really multi-talented people, and they can be very tough to find. I think the good news is that a lot of the digital natives that are coming into the marketplace today are very comfortable with blogging. They're very comfortable with video. That's the YouTube generation. They're very comfortable with social media. So in some respects, they're bringing these tools to market, where in the past, we had to kind of train the old school guys like me on how to do these things. But that's a great opportunity as well, because it's not just about being a journalist, it's being part of the conversation, part of the community, and also seeing the impact of your work in ways that were harder to do before. In the past, when the print publication went out, unless you ran into someone at an event, it was very difficult to get that direct feedback on what you were doing. But today, through social, you can build up that network. You can hear back from people on how that content resonated. You can see from the analytics what people are consuming, and even to the point where they dropped off in an article, where you lost them in an article. So I think it is a challenge to find people, but it's also a far more engaging job than it used to be if you have the mindset that you want to engage in all these things.
Well, you certainly have some great people. I mean, for example, Lauren Brussel, who's a millennial working for CIO magazine, has actually been on CXO-Talk as a guest host with us.
Right.
But now, we've spoken about the media industry, and I think a lot of people, if I cut right to the chase, I think a lot of people want to know, how do they pitch journalists successfully?
It's a $1 million question. We hear that all the time. And by the way, thanks to your listener with the tip. It seems to have worked wonderfully, and I appreciate that tip and apologize for any problems there. Uh, Lauren is terrific, by the way, and thank you for recognizing Lauren. We have a lot of great talents like Lauren. Another gentleman, Brandon Butler, on the Network World staff, who has become an expert in cloud computing, and I read his content before I go out and talk to cloud computing companies. Lots of good folks like that. I could name dozens of them. When it comes to pitching, I think the challenge for anyone pitching today is that the landscape is so different. In the past, there were a narrow set of media companies that had oversized influence in the market. So whether you were talking about a few broadcasters, a few publications in the tech industry or in the general media industry, it were a certain number of places you had to reach, and you had that broadcast effect. The opportunity and the challenge today is that media is differentiated. So you can find much narrower streams of information that are targeting the people that you really need to reach to. The beauty of that is that you can find the people that you really need to reach to, whether you're marketing to them or trying to communicate through the media to them. The challenge of that is you have to understand that landscape, and you have to put the work into determining who are those influencers. Vala, this is right up your alley. Who are the key people that you absolutely have to reach? So today it's not about reaching 1,000 journalists, because you can easily reach that many or more. It's how do I reach the 10 journalists that really make a difference in this market? Where are they? What are they doing? What are the hot button issues that they're following? So that's the thing that I really, Michael, that's what I really counsel people on, which is making sure that you do that homework first. You know, I was out at CES in early January, and you can go into a ballroom and you can be hip to hip with as many journalists as you want to face. It's a daunting and frightening prospect. It's much better to figure out, to me, who are the folks that are going to amplify the message, understand the message critically, and to be able to communicate with the right audiences about that message.
Right, right. Last week we had, John, we had Tiffany Bova, Vice President, Distinguished Analyst from Gartner, and she talked about the seller's dilemma, and she talked about, you know, compressed differentiation that exists in the market today with so many players, and how do you achieve precision selling and precision marketing and understanding the personas that you're trying to connect to, and in the seller's context, the buying journey, the buying process journey, and how that's so critically important for sales and marketing to deliver content that really adds value based on where the buyers is in the journey. And I think about IDG and all the technology publications from TechCrunch, GigaOM, Vox, even, you know, Wall Street Journal, New York Times have their digital sections. And so what are some of the metrics that you look for to ensure that you are hitting the right persona and the right target audience as you're delivering your content?
Yeah, it's a great question. A number of things. We do a lot of online and regular online surveys of the people that are coming to our sites. So not only who are you, because we want very much to know, you know, what size industry, what are your specific job responsibilities, what are you buying, planning to buy, where are you in the purchase cycle. We also talk, we talk with folks about how are they using these media. So when you have 10 minutes to kill in the morning because you're waiting for the train, when you're on the train, when you're in the office, when you have a lunch break, when you're heading home after you've eaten dinner, we want to understand every one of those moments in the landscape so that we can tailor the content to that. And then I talked about the analytics to help us understand what's the behavior of the people who are consuming these articles. What other articles are they consuming? How far did they engage with these articles? When did they stop? So it's really trying to understand everything about those patterns of consumption and who's consuming that information.
What about the content itself? You know, so let's go back to pitching journalists and getting recognized by journalists. So you've identified the influencer or the right journalist. How do you approach that person, and what is the content that you need to produce to get that journalist to take the step you want, which is to publish about you?
Yeah, I think where I've seen the best folks in communications and public relations are folks that have built a relationship with the key influencers. And that's, as simple as, hey, I'd like to get to talk to you and find out what are you covering? What is your beat? What are the issues that are most important to you? What do you understand about my client or not understand about my client? I think within that, just as you reach out to a seller, you've got very limited time, so you have to make crystal clear, why is this important? And unfortunately, what we continue to see a lot is irrelevant information that's bombarded to people. We had a lot on the net neutrality debate this week with the FCC decision, and I can't tell you how many companies took the same kind of overboiled, lame approach of trying to hook their message into net neutrality. So this thing or the other, that they wanted us to pay attention to them because of net neutrality. Or they'll send us information on things about their company that we don't really cover. We don't spend a lot of time covering mergers and acquisitions unless they're giant mergers and acquisitions. We don't do a lot on financial results. We don't do a lot on executive level changes within organizations. But yet we receive lots of information about that. And it doesn't seem like the folks who are communicating with us are doing that filtering function. By the same token, they'll quite often forget or neglect to let us know about really significant engagements that they have with customers so that we can understand who those buyers are, what are they doing with the technology, and how is that technology changing the business. The other thing that I talk with PR and communications folks quite often is, because these companies talk to customers far more often than we do. If you're out in the market, you're talking to customers far more often than we can. You're seeing trends and issues in the industry that you ought to be alerting us to. And we don't often get story pitches along that line. So if you see things that are reshaping, there's changes in buyer behavior, buyer patterns. There are issues that keep cropping up that change why companies are buying your technology. There are security issues that you're hearing about, management issues, things like that. We don't hear about those stories often. We tend to get the boilerplate stuff, and that's very easily ignored stuff.
So, John, so as long as it's an outside-in narrative, which is forward-looking, potentially with trends and where the buyer is going, where the market's going, that's what makes a good potential pitch to IDG.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, like any relationship, Vala, this is an exchange of value, right? I mean, you're looking for value in communicating a message to our target audiences. We're looking for value in bringing us something that audience needs to know about. And often that part of the value proposition isn't well thought through. So, even a tip about something that's going on that has nothing to do with your company, it's a great way to build up that relationship with somebody, a great way to build that connection. We have seen people develop really strong relationships with the key communicators, either with a vendor company or with a PR or agency person, because of that building up of rapport and exchange of value over time.
It
right?
It seems very few PR people actually think about it in terms of that exchange of value. I mean, I know I get pitched all the time for things. Vala, you must get pitched as well. And it seems like it's just take. There's no concept of, well, here's actually something that's going to be useful or beneficial to me.
Yeah, Michael, I'd say that's accurate. And I think, I don't want to be blaming the PR folks, because I know that they're under tremendous pressure from corporate clients about doing something. We need to do something, and this press release mentality that everything we do needs to be encapsulated in a press release and issued out to folks. It's very difficult to convince folks of building that relationship and investing the time in that relationship. And I see, Vala, to go back to an earlier question you had about corporate content, I think that's one of the challenges with corporate content. Our brands have value because they've literally been for years delivering value to the audience. So the audience has come to trust them, come to rely on them. That's not something you can do overnight. You don't do that with 5 pieces of content. You don't do that through 2 webcasts. You don't do that through, 8 tweets. These are things that require a commitment to do well and to put aside sort of the momentary gain for the long-term value of building that relationship. So if you're a corporate content provider, think about the different types of content that are of value to the audience. It's not just about new products. You probably, from your customer service folks, could glean a wealth of information about issues that customers are dealing with all the time. And creating content around those issues is a huge value to your organization. It cements the current customer relationship, and it opens the door to a new customer relationship because you're answering questions that probably a lot of buyers have. So becoming, and we're starting to see some folks that are doing this. If you look at IBM and the work they've put in developer works for creating content for developers, that's a long-term investment in content that pays off. But I think too many people think this content thing is quick and easy, and a lot of it is about them, and it's just the opposite of that.
So that's the mistake that most corporate content providers are making. Is it about the product? It's more of an inward rather than outward value to their target audience purpose and philosophy?
Yeah, I think Vala, they have trouble separating the content marketing from the marketing.
Yeah.
So there's a role for content in marketing if you define marketing as establishing and building that relationship and finding those audiences. But the content itself can't be solely used for marketing. That content has to provide a value to the audience. People invest time in content, and they don't want to invest time and find it poorly spent. So it's really, I think, the number one thing is not having a content strategy. And that content strategy really starts with defining who am I trying to reach. I'm not trying to reach everyone unless I'm doing Dancing with the Stars or The Bachelor or something like that. And even those are probably narrower audiences. What you're trying to define is who is the reader and what am I doing for that reader. Once you understand those things, then you start to look at the tactical issues of what are the best ways to deliver that, what comes through social, what comes through video, what comes through how-to versus case studies versus QA, white papers, things like that. But I think far too often those initial questions of who are we trying to reach and what are we trying to do for them are just not answered. And I see this day in and day out because there's virtually every company in the market thinks they need to reach CIOs. And they can be making a $1.99 app or a $2 million ERP system. They still think they need to reach a CIO, and they don't really understand the dynamics of who their buyer is and what they should be saying to that buyer.
So there's a lack of clarity. So it begins then, you're saying, with a lack of clarity around the nature of the buyer, what the buyer is interested in, what are the value points for the buyer,
right.
And then lack of clarity in connecting that to the sellers. The seller has lack of clarity connecting that to their offering.
Yes, exactly. And I'll put that into concrete terms because it's something each one of our reporters faces on a daily basis. You have to make a decision about how to invest your time as a reporter. So if you're working on something that doesn't reach your target audience and doesn't offer value to the target audience, you're really failing as a reporter. We have a concept that we talk about here, which is stories that shake things up. And the idea behind the stories that shake things up is you should be able to identify, and I ask the editors-in-chief about this, you need to be able to identify for me on a monthly basis what are the stories that you delivered that nobody else would deliver to that audience. Because if you can't point to those stories, you're not differentiating the content and you're not delivering something that's going to build that engagement with the audience. And it's a filter that has to be applied to every single thing we do because there's an infinite number of choices we can make about what to cover, how to cover it, when to cover it. The most important decision is why are we covering this? And that's a question that has to be answered by marketers alike as journalists.
John, do you have advice on social media? I mean, certainly it's woven into how you deliver the content, how you engage with your readers. I love seeing you in my Twitter stream in morning, afternoon, and night which is pretty exceptional for a C-suite executive, in my view. So what advice do you have for us in terms of social media?
Well, I think my first advice would be for anyone on here who's not following me to follow me so I can get over 10,000. I'm within just within inches of getting over 10,000. But I think, Vala, a couple things. One is initially, and I still think we're probably guilty of this, much more talking than listening in social media. So we put a lot of content out in social media. We retweet our own content. We use it as a real loudspeaker for putting our content out to the right audiences. We should be doing more listening. And we have started looking at some social media listening tools. I know you know these well. There are folks in our company that use BuzzSumo or BrandWatch. Mm-hmm. And really what I'd like to do is find the influencers, be better at finding the influencers. To be making sure that they understand things that we've published that might be of interest to them and their audiences, but that's still on the guilty publishing and broadcasting side of things. And more importantly, to be following them and making sure that we are understanding the things that are on their minds, because that can help shape our content and make it better.
Terrific advice. Terrific advice.
So you've got social media then is an important part of your strategy today.
Absolutely, yeah. For the reasons that I mentioned, one was because we want more control over our growth to be in the hands of our audience. We want them sharing that and recommending that content, but also because it's a wonderful time in journalism where you can get that immediate reaction. I love when I tweet something and people respond to it. It's also a terrific tool. Yesterday I asked a question, who is the PR person at Google for the Android product line, and within seconds I had LinkedIn profiles that were shared with me, email addresses. It's a wonderful tool. So it's really a remarkable thing, and we're actually exploring how to use different pieces of the social media landscape in different ways. I'll note that we tend to talk an awful lot about things like Twitter or Facebook, but some of the really valuable things for us are the social aggregators, the Reddits, the Farks, the StumbleUpons, the Slashdots. If our readers share our content in those forums, that can generate a flood of traffic back to our sites and conversation from those forums. And on LinkedIn, we have used LinkedIn to establish really deep connections. At one point, I don't know if this is still true, but at one point the CIO LinkedIn group was the largest group on LinkedIn.
Wow.
And literally tens of thousands of people who have been accepted to be part of that forum. We can put a research questionnaire out into that forum and have that done in a heartbeat by really qualified people, where in the past you had to mail those or you had to use some online survey company, and it was a challenge to fulfill. Now our audience is helping us with things like that as well. So each of these social media has a different value and a different power, and we're trying to use them to their greatest effect.
We're going to run over a little bit because we had some technical glitches at the start, if everybody is comfortable with that. So John, I want to go back to this tension between the numbers, the page views and all of that, relative to producing good content. So your revenue model is advertising plus custom events and content, as I understand, and so that means you need to deliver numbers. And again, so how do you balance the tension between creating great journalistic content and just the pure race to the bottom of delivering numbers at all cost?
You asked a very savvy question earlier about page views and are there any deleterious effects of focusing on page views. We actually found that early on when we were moving more of our emphasis online, where we would give people page view targets or having people competing on page view goals. And you're right, it does tend to push people toward a lowest common denominator. Our business today really has multiple revenue streams. So there's display or banner advertising on our websites. There's also lead generation, which is a big piece of our business, some of which comes from our sites, some of which comes from the email efforts, our outbound email efforts. We have a large event business. We also have a data business where we can help people target advertising, even outside of IDG sites, using information about them. So we have multiple revenue streams, and they're not all completely dependent on traffic. So for example, I mentioned really the goal of trying to understand what people are doing on the site and who they are, which enables us to continue to cover things that are not, in some cases, strong traffic drivers. So for example, I think it would be fair to say that storage technology is not as big a traffic driver as coverage of a new iPad or a new iPhone. That's a given. However, if that well-constructed storage piece brings a very senior IT person onto the site, and that content engages that person in such a way that they complete a business transaction with us, they download a white paper, they sign up for an event, they do something like that, that is a hugely valuable transaction for us. So for us, it's a balance. It's making sure at the outset that we get the kinds of people that we're trying to get to our sites, and then we engage them in the most effective ways possible.
John, we've had startup founders and CEOs as guests. It happened to be Aaron Levy of Box or Brian Halligan of HubSpot. So these are larger startups. But
Great.
if you're giving advice to a small startup or a small business where they don't have a large PR budget or marketing budget, how can they embrace and use content to help bring awareness and grow their business? Any advice to a startup founder?
Yeah, I love that question. You know, Vala, one of the things that we produce is the demo conference where we are launching, 40, 50 companies and products at each conference. We've got one demo traction conference coming up in April out in the Bay Area. This is something we talk to startups about all the time. I think it's actually a wonderful time for a startup because I find that IT folks are much more open to startups than they have been in the past. Mm-hmm. You may remember this, that in the past it was almost a badge of honor for a CIO to talk about how difficult it was to get in to see him or her and how many calls they didn't take and things they rejected. Well, the problem with that is you had people in your organization now who are perfectly willing and happy to go around you and bring in the technologies they need. So there's real pressure on IT today to make sure that they understand what's happening in a startup landscape and that they can start to be the conduit to bring those new solutions into companies. Now, that said, and I think that's a wonderful thing for startups, it's still around this challenge of figuring out who in the organization do I need to reach. You probably don't need to reach the CIO yet. You need to find the person in the organization that's going to be the passionate advocate for your technology. And that's really around articulating what problems does it solve, what opportunities does it open up, and finding the person that those messages are going to resonate with. And that's hard work. Once you do that, you can connect that with the influencers in the social sphere, the influencers in the media, and bring the message to them and try to get them to understand that value proposition.
So if we can summarize it, then it's three things. And correct me if I have misunderstood this. Number one, create a clear value proposition of what you're actually offering. Number two, identify the appropriate people inside your target market. So if you're selling to the enterprise, that means most likely not the CIO. I mean, it's possible, yes, but for most startups, that initially is not going to be the case. And then number three, find the appropriate journalists and take that clear, succinct, concise value proposition and present it to the journalist.
That's exactly right. It's around having a content strategy, which is part of a larger marketing strategy. And when I talk about journalists, by the way, there are a wealth of folks. There are independent bloggers who are not affiliated with a media brand, but are hugely influential in their realm. They may understand software-defined networking better than anyone. They may understand marketing technology or biotech or healthcare IT better than anyone. So it's understanding who's out there in the independent blogosphere, who within the bigger media companies is really passionate about these technologies, because you see them writing about them. They're at the right conferences. I think the message here is that, like everything else, the media has gotten to be less about mass and more about targeted. And it's targeting the message, targeting the people that you're trying to reach.
You're dropping a ton of science, and I can barely keep up on Twitter, and I'm pretty practiced at this. So this is, I'm going to make sure my entire staff watches this session. Incredible advice in terms of content and marketing and how to sustain and grow relevancy. Thank you so much, John.
Well, a pleasure.
Well, do you have another few minutes?
Sure.
So you mentioned bloggers, because I'm as interested in this as everybody else.
Me too.
So you mentioned bloggers. Aren't bloggers, you're saying go talk to bloggers, but aren't bloggers, in a sense, your competitor today?
Michael, I could look at the world like that, but unfortunately that would create a landscape that's almost too big for me to deal with. Yes, bloggers are competition, just like our traditional media is competition, just like in growing numbers, vendors are our competition. You know, we see some companies like I mentioned, IBM, Cisco is also in there, people who are doing terrific things with content. So yes, that's competition. We're all competing for people's time. But there's a value proposition that everybody has to complete here. And if somebody can provide you with additional information that makes you successful in your job, that's great. You should know about those people. You'll probably spend less time with someone else because of that. Hopefully that won't come out of my hide, because I'm doing the right things to maintain the time that you do spend with me. But yeah, we have to be careful looking at it, everyone as competition, because there's lots of it out there. You know, even really good folks on social media, we can consider them competition. But that's, I think, too pessimistic a way to look at the world today.
Again, terrific advice.
Well, I guess it is that time, isn't it?
This is fun. We can't go on for another 2 hours.
Well, I think let's come back another time, and we will, because I think that this set of topics that we've been talking about, which is first what's happening in the media business, and now if you're a vendor or a large company or a small company and you want to reach journalists and do that effectively, how do you do it? It's a pretty interesting set of issues.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's wonderful to see, I think, 10 years ago there was this dialogue around journalism being dead, or the web was killing media, things like that. I don't think there's ever been a better time to have the skill set that we have as journalists, because we understand audiences, we understand how to create things of value to those audiences, and increasingly we understand the different media for doing that. And there are a rich array of tools to do that. So if you love to podcast, wonderful. Create a podcast realm. Own the podcast world. Just wonderful ways to do that today. It's never been better.
Hey, Vala, let's try to do that on CXO-Talk. What do you think?
I would love to do that.
You guys are well on your way.
Hopefully you get a chance to look at the Twitter stream. Frank Scavo, an incredible analyst and thought leader, technology thought leader, just tweeted, John Gallant just gave a college lecture on tech media relationships. So you have big fans, including myself and Michael. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me. What an honor to be the 100th guest.
We expect you to come back on our 200th episode.
Love it.
Well, this has been an honor for us. We have been talking with John Gallant, who is the Chief Content Officer responsible for IDG Communications U.S. magazines, and that's a whole lot of magazines. This has been episode number 100. I am Michael Krigsman, and my glorious, let's say glorious and friendly co-host, Vala.
Thank you, Michael.
Afshar? I was just thinking you were going to say your name. John, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Gentlemen, a pleasure. I appreciate it, and thanks to everyone listening.
And everybody watching, come back again next week, because we'll be back same time, next place for CXO Talk in a week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.